Province of Manabí is now Ecuador's most deadly, fueled by cocaine trafficking and feuding criminal gangs. Some of them former fishermen who've turned to drug running.
The important thing is to realize that we've reached a point where this can't continue, where the state has to react and act to detain this problem.
Efforts so far have fallen far short. As we leave, a new massacre at a nearby beach. 2 fishermen and 2 standers-by killed. An apparent act of reprisal by a rival gang. A scene that horrifies, but no longer surprises anyone. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Manta, Ecuador.
We're going to take a short break, but before we go, a look at the future of some of the endangered species in the US which could go into extinction in the coming months. Phil Lavelle now.
AI is the future. Will it make them a thing of the past? The whooping crane, or the whooper, is one of the world's rarest birds, virtually extinct, and campaigners say this could finish them off.
We'll also declare a national energy emergency.
That energy needed for vast AI data centers, the military, factories, and farming, what the president calls the Great American Comeback. And the knock-on effect, a different potential emergency right here on the Texas Gulf Coast. Home to critically low numbers of the whooper and several other endangered species, putting wildlife and Washington on a collision course. At the heart of this is the Endangered Species Act, which has saved 99% of species under it since the 1970s. Now, President Trump's executive order rolled back some of those protections, prioritizing energy production over crucial habitat preservation. It all ties into a big election promise.
We will drill, baby, drill.
And there is a lot of drilling to be done here in Texas. Some conservationists are calling this a dumpster fire. They're not holding back. Is that a fair assessment?
I'd say no, especially here in Texas. We've been producing oil with these cranes the whole time. Let's see.
Tour guide Tommy relies on the wildlife. If the birds die, so does his business. But he's optimistic.
I'm not concerned here, just because we've been doing it so long and everything's, in sync. And as you can see, they're doing well.
There is an important word here, and that word is harm. Previously, destroying a habitat was classed as harming the animal, which is illegal. But the executive order has changed the definition. Harm now means to physically harm the animal. Basically, construction can destroy a habitat, but if it doesn't kill the animal there and then legally, that's okay.
Well, not only would we lose the cranes, we'd lose our livelihood.
Back on the water, we meet Kevin, another Texan who counts on the whoopers. He is concerned about what may be ahead.
If he comes in October and his habitat is destroyed, the crane won't stay. And we've really poured everything into this for the last 23 years, so it would be devastating.
This is the point in the report where we give you the energy industry's response, and there it is. There isn't one. Now, we did try. We reached out to multiple people, multiple bodies in multiple parts of this state, and nobody would talk to us. And remember, this is Texas. This is America's energy capital. There is no shortage of energy industry voices here. For now, the cranes are here, and their numbers have actually increased recently, but like so many species, their safety net is gone.
You dig something up or lay a board road, does it hurt a certain tiny species? Possible. But if you come back and fix it, they're probably going to be okay.
America is hungry for power. Question is, who's paying for it? Phil Lavelle, Al Jazeera, Port Aransas on the Texas Gulf Coast.
As the war on Iran widens, its impact is spreading beyond the battlefield. Shockwaves are hitting global energy markets as facilities are damaged, supply routes disrupted, and risks to vital shipping lanes grow. Stay with Al Jazeera for continued coverage and expert analysis.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces.
To prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza. The same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera. The latest news as it breaks.
The situation looks to be far from de-escalation as the continuous exchange of fire remains the reality on the ground.
With detailed coverage.
As U.S. casualties mount from the growing conflict with Iran, 3/4 of Americans say that the country should be cautious of regime change wars.
From around the world.
Evacuation orders were issued for this town, but it was just a few minutes after that intense Israeli strikes targeted the town.
It's 0700 GMT, and you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the war between the US, Israel, and Iran. I'm Sami Zaidan. US and Israeli forces bombed the city of Isfahan in the early hours of Sunday. The death toll inside Iran now approaching 1,500. Iran retaliates against Israel, launching a wave of attacks overnight on Tel Aviv and Ramla. At least 3 people are injured. Israeli airstrikes continue to hit Beirut and southern Lebanon. At least 4 people are killed in Sidon. And the US president says other countries will help the military secure the Strait of Hormuz, but none are so far promising to do so. The death toll is rising in the conflict between Israel, the US, and Iran. More than 1,400 people have now been killed in Iran. Millions more are displaced, and the world's energy supplies, it's disrupted. Well, the central Iranian city of Isfahan has been hit by a wave of US and Israeli attacks on Sunday morning. One strike hit a factory, killing at least 15 workers. The Iranian capital has also been bombed. And as global shipping gets disrupted in the Strait of Hormuz, the US President Donald Trump is now calling on allies to send warships to the area. He says many countries are sending help, but hasn't said which ones. About 1/5 of the global crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally pass through the strait. We're live in the occupied West Bank, Beirut and Doha. But first, let's head over to Tehran, speak to Tawheed Asdi. So, Tawheed, an intensification of strikes, particularly on widening civilian targets, and especially on Isfahan, right?
Yes, absolutely right. We are from the early hours of morning today. We witnessed the intensified wave of strikes targeting the city of Isfahan, which is one of the most historic cities and 3rd most populated city across the country. And of course, that is not limited to that city. We know that across the country, as we are on day 16, third week since the commencement of the airstrikes by the Americans and Israelis, over 200 cities, including important cities like Tabriz, Isfahan, and others, have been targeted by these airstrikes. And of course, speaking of the fatalities, as you mentioned, the recorded official number says more than 1,400 people have lost their lives, but still we know that this is the official one. We know that there are some unrecorded people lost their lives, and when it comes to injuries, there is even a more growing number, the more concerning number, saying that many people have been injured as a result of these airstrikes. And speaking of the civilian infrastructures, the latest came from the Red Crescent, saying that more than 42,000 civilian units, including, I would say, over 36,000 residential units, over 6,000 commercial establishments like factories, like shops, and over 160 healthcare facilities and 120 educational facilities, including schools, and 7 buildings belonging to the Red Crescent itself have been impacted, some of them partially, some of them fully destroyed. Yesterday and the day before, I was in one of the neighborhoods in the eastern parts of the capital, and the amount of destruction and the amount of actually damage caused by these airstrikes in a very residential area was quite enormous, massive, unprecedented, and that runs the risk of further fatalities when it comes to death tolls. As we know that it is not just the military headquarters, police stations, or buildings belonging to the state being targeted, but also when it comes to residential areas, we can see that there are a lot of damage, there are a lot of impact in that regard.
Are we hearing anything from Iranian officials about Donald Trump's claim that many nations will be sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, Iranians are saying that they are ready for a war of attrition, for a long-time confrontation, and even prior to initiation of these recent terror strikes, they warned against the possibility of an all-out, full-fledged confrontation, specifically when it comes to regional countries. They came out to say that in case of any attack by the United States to Iran, there is going to be a potential regional confrontation, and they are going to attack any third country which allows actually its territory to be used in order to carry out strikes against the Iranian territories. That is part and parcel of Iran's constant strategy, coming out to say that this is not the Americans and Israelis, but any third country who gets engaged in these campaign of strikes is going to be their targets. And of course, speaking of the latest, specifically what happened in Khark, it is the most significant geostrategically speaking choke point, the place from which a considerable part of Iran's oil exports is conducted. And speaking of also the Strait of Hormuz, we know that Iranians are very sensitive in that regard. They're saying that in case of any attack to their oil infrastructures, there's going to be a retaliation. And on that, one military official from Khatam al-Anbiya came out yesterday to say that in case they attack our oil infrastructures, the response is going to be like we attacking any oil infrastructure which is in a sense related or even has a sort of cooperation with the Americans and the Israelis. So that is putting out the risk of further escalation in this already delicate situation.
All right, Tawhid Asadi there from the Iranian capital. Thanks so much. Iran launched a new wave of retaliatory attacks on Israel overnight, striking a number of central communities. This was the scene in Tel Aviv district early on Sunday. Police say a missile strike injured at least 3 people and damaged several vehicles and buildings. Rescue teams were searching the area to ensure no one was trapped in the debris. Nida Ibrahim joins us live now from Tubas in the occupied West Bank. So we saw an intensification, I think it's fair to say, of Iranian missile attacks overnight, right?
Yes, we can say that because these waves still continue as we speak. Just in the past 15 minutes, sirens have sounded in northern Israel and in southern Israel. The northern Israel is a barrage expected to be coming into Israel from Hezbollah, from Lebanon, while the barrage that was fired, or the ballistic missile was fired from Iran into southern Israel. These attacks are happening simultaneously around the same time in an attempt to overwhelm the Israeli aerial defense system. Now, according to Israeli media, the missiles were intercepted. The one that was directed towards southern Israel has exploded in the air. Now, yes, we talk about a decreased number of these Iranian missiles. Since the beginning of the war, the Israeli estimates talk about 300 missiles being fired from Iran into Israel. They say 90% of these have been intercepted, so that keeps us with 10%. We don't have enough info about how much damage they've caused to the strategic
There was a general warning yesterday when the Hog Island attack was happening, the U.S. launching an operation on Hog Island, where Donald Trump said that out of humane concerns, he decided that they won't be striking oil refineries and production facilities, but only military targets, but he might change his mind. So Iran warns that should that happen, U.S. interests in energy all across the region, and there's plenty of those, plenty of joint projects all across the Gulf, would be targeted by Iran. But for the UAE, there was a separate warning saying that its ports, docks, and military sites are a legitimate target, and urging residents and workers to leave those sites, specifically at two ports, Jebel Ali Port in Dubai and Khalifa Port in Abu Dhabi. And in Fujairah Port, there was an attack where local authorities said they downed a drone, it fell down, the debris caused a fire. We've seen pillars of smoke billowing from that area for several hours. It took a while to put out that fire, and operations were suspended, and we've yet to receive confirmation if they have resumed. It's a very important port for the UAE because it's the only alternative that they have to the Strait of Hormuz, and they can export around 1 million barrels per day out of this port of Fujairah, which is around 1% of the global oil supply. Sounds like not too much, but it is actually massive.
Dmitry Medvedenko there from Doha. Armed groups in Iraq that are linked to Iran have released a video they say shows their recent attacks on US targets. The pictures from the Iraqi Hezbollah brigades comes from cameras mounted on drones. They appear to show low-altitude strikes on the US Victoria military base near Baghdad airport on Saturday. After the attack, the US Embassy in Baghdad called for American citizens to immediately leave Iraq, saying there is a significant threat of attack. As we've been reporting, the US president says many countries will send warships to protect the Strait of Hormuz. But he hasn't said which ones or when. About 20% of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes through the strait. Iran has effectively blocked it. But according to the Iranian ambassador to India, some Indian ships were allowed to pass through the strait on Saturday. And Trump is signaling he's not ready to end the conflict with Iran at this stage. In a wide-ranging interview with NBC News, he said he's not prepared to strike a deal with Tehran, saying the current terms are not good enough yet, adding that any terms will have to be, quote, very solid. Trump claimed US strikes on Kharg Island totally demolished most of the island, and that the US, quote, may hit it a few more times just for fun. Al Jazeera's John Holman is following developments in Washington with this report.
President Trump's been railing against media coverage of his campaign against Iran, describing it as fake news. He says that he and the United States has destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability. But at the same time, he's tacitly recognizing that he has a problem with the Strait of Hormuz. He says that even with the destruction that the United States has wrought, that Iran still has the capacity to attack that with drones or with missiles. And he's actually asked for the help of other countries to try and protect oil tankers and vessels that are going through that all-important strait. 20% of the world's oil traffic that goes through there. He's said he wants help from China, the United Kingdom, France, South Korea. He's named some of the countries, and in a later interview with NBC News, he said that countries had actually committed to the idea, and not just that, but they said that it was a great idea, but he hasn't named actually which countries are willing to do that. And the United States itself has said that at the moment it can't militarily escort vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, that it's working towards that at some date. President Trump also said in the NBC interview that he got the offer of a deal that Iran have reached out with him to make a deal, but the terms of that deal weren't good enough yet. So for now, that he and the United States were going to continue fighting. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Washington, D.C.
A new poll in the US shows many Americans are worried about the military strikes on Iran. The survey by Quinnipiac University finds 53% of voters oppose the attacks, while 40% support them. There's also strong opposition to sending soldiers. Nearly 3/4 say they don't want US ground troops sent to Iran. More than 3/4 believe the conflict could lead to an attack inside the United States, and many also fear higher oil prices. The poll also shows mixed views about Israel. 44% say the United States is too supportive of Israel. The same number says the level of support is about right. Earlier, my colleague Sarah Khairat spoke to Rina Shah, a geopolitical advisor and the founding principal of Vental's Strategic Advisory Group. She's also a former senior Republican congressional advisor, and she says there are disagreements about the war even within the White House.
What we're seeing right now isn't just policy disagreement. It's a genuine tug of war inside Trump's inner circle over this war in Iran. On one side, you've got the hawks who want to finish what they started, which is, put on regime pressure, have full dominance in the Gulf. On the other side, you've got voices that are closer to the original America First instinct. Folks like Vice President J.D. Vance, who are signaling daylight here. They're saying this could drag on and it could cost us politically and hand the midterms to the other side. So it's not chaos, it's just classic Republican tension between decisive action and avoiding quagmires.
And you just mentioned Trump's America First, and that's what got Donald Trump elected in the first place. But we're seeing, though, the complete opposite, it seems, here for many. Do you think the Republican Party risks losing voters moving forward if this war is prolonged? And could it hurt Republicans in November's midterm election, for example?
Oh, without a doubt. Republican voters sent a strong message to Washington that they no longer wanted nation building abroad. And so what you're seeing within the Republican Party right now are sort of three different camps. The first is neoconservatives, folks like Senator Lindsey Graham. And then you've got in the second camp folks like Vice President J.D. Vance, who again is showing his distance and how divergent he is in his views on this from his very own president, his own boss. And then thirdly, you've got, again, people who really consider themselves at some point allies with President Trump. And they really oscillate somewhere between Make America Great Again and America First. But they are unique in that they are people like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens. These people are also known to embrace conspiracy theories. They are the third camp. So I'll just say this, the fracture really boils down to one question. Is this a quick surgical operation to neuter Iran's nuclear ambitions and proxies, or are we sleepwalking into another long, expensive entanglement?
You actually hit the nail on the head there, because I was going to ask you, for Republicans that are at this moment supporting it, is that support guaranteed over the long term if the war does continue because Trump remains committed to it, for example?
I'll put it this way. Trump sold no forever wars as a slogan, but also as a promise. But Iran is not folding like some expected here. And namely the president. He thought Iran would just fold immediately after we took out Khamenei and thought that the people would take to the streets and as he put it in that first couple of days, that it's up to the Iranian people to determine in their future and to form their own government almost. That naivety, I think we see now how really it's hurt the president, because again, the polls are reflecting this. But the resilience of this Iranian regime hitting back at American bases, again, threatening Hormuz, it has forced a real rethink here in Washington. Insiders within the Republican Party are split because the easy victory narrative from February is colliding with this March reality we have now. Higher oil prices, allied jitters, and a base that is asking, wait, this is what America First looks like?
Since the US and Israel launched their war on Iran, Yemen's Iran-backed Ansarullah Houthis have noticeably been absent. Inside the country, There are mixed views on whether the group should join Tehran's retaliation. Some are encouraging strikes, but others worry it could lead to another humanitarian disaster. Yusuf Mauri reports from Sana'a.
In recent years, Yemen's Ansarullah group, also known as the Houthis, has been targeting what it says are U.S. and Israeli-linked ships in the Red Sea, saying it's in solidarity with the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza. But since the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran began last month, the Yemeni group has largely refrained from getting involved. Some hardliners are reportedly advocating for renewed strikes against U.S. and Israeli-linked assets. They argue that Yemen's military capabilities have only grown and that confrontation is inevitable.
The US and Israel are constantly plotting against Yemen, even if we decide not to enter the war, even if they know they cannot defeat Yemen. We have technology that they don't have. We have already defeated the US and Israel in the previous war. Since the last war, we have only advanced more militarily.
Yemen's geographic location gives it an advantage. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, is critical for global commerce.
Yemen can retaliate in a number of ways. It has strategic leverage over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. There's also hypersonic and ballistic missiles that can be used to target Tel Aviv or U.S. military and economic assets across the region.
But within Yemen itself, another conversation is taking shape after nearly a decade of foreign wars that have devastated the economy, roads, and buildings. Some Yemenis now express a desire to focus on improving their country.
The Yemeni people want peace and stability so that our nation and our economy can revive. There is no way for us to revive and improve our internal affairs while undergoing constant wars. However, we are ready for any scenario.
According to Ahmed al-Shirahi, a member of Ansarullah Houthi movement, the conflict is viewed through a wider lens.
Whether we enter the war with Iran in this round or not, our long-term goal is to free the Middle East from all the US military bases and their aircraft carriers. This is what we're aiming to achieve in the near future.
The debate within Yemen reflects a fundamental question facing the nation's leadership: whether to leverage its military capacity in regional confrontations or to channel its resources towards development and other domestic priorities. The Yemeni group is keeping their finger on the trigger, as their leader puts it. But joining a full-scale war could put Yemen on the edge of another humanitarian disaster. Yusuf Maudi, Al Jazeera, Sana'a.
You're watching Al Jazeera. Time to recap our headlines. Iran's central province of Isfahan has been hit by a wave of US and Israeli attacks. One strike hit a factory, killing at least 15 workers. The Iranian capital has also been bombed. Iran launched another wave of missile strikes on Tel Aviv. Most were intercepted, but falling shrapnel injured at least 3 people. There were also reports of damage in several communities in central Israel. US President Donald Trump has called on allies to send warships to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. He says many countries are sending help, but hasn't said which ones. Iran has been disrupting traffic in this vital trade route for global energy supplies. Samir Puri is a visiting lecturer in war studies at King's College in London. He joins us live from London now. Good to have you with us. So we're seeing a heavy, intense US and Israeli shelling on Isfahan in particular. That's an industrial, considered one of the industrial heartlands of Iran. What does that tell us about the US strategy? Is it simply trying to break down the infrastructure of a state at this point?
Well, I think it tells us that the US doesn't really have a strategy other than maximum destruction of Iran's industrial and military capabilities. And I think what's happening is that while that is probably a strategic necessity for Israel as it sees it, it's very hard to see how the US emerges from even another week, 2-3 weeks of pummeling the Iranian industrial capacity with a suitable outcome. And that's the thing about strategy. It's not just about the tactics that are used. It's not just about the targets that are used. It's about the political endgame, the political outcome that arises from this. But make no mistake, there will be much more damage suffered by Iran's industrial and military capabilities in the meantime.
Did the US count on a popular uprising that hasn't materialized, or was there just a lack of clarity on what the strategic goals were?
You know, I never thought that we would see an attack on another country that makes Russia's invasion of Ukraine look well planned by comparison, if I'm being very honest with you. Remember Mar-a-Lago's speech of the 28th of February that Trump delivered when he launched this attack on Iran? He talked about the Iranian people rising up. He used quite emotive language at the end of February, saying this will be your only chance, perhaps, for generations to the Iranian people. And what clearly appears to have happened is Trump has seen the protests that were violently suppressed, brutally suppressed over the last few months, and drawn some very naive, I think, connections as to what bombing from the air could actually do to allow those protesters to resume their assault on the regime domestically. But that's not happened. And I think what we've subsequently seen is the US making it up as it goes along in terms of trying to attach different narratives to the military offense that they're conducting. But I go back to that original point. Maximum destruction over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks is actually a pretty good outcome for the way Benjamin Netanyahu sees what Israel needs to do in the region. It is going to be very problematic for Donald Trump because the US is the biggest underwriter of Gulf state security. And that security, not only for the Gulf states, but the Straits of Hormuz, as we've been hearing, is only going to get worse and worse with a deeply embittered Iranian regime that may actually feel quite vindicated that it emerges from this bloodied but unbound.
And what does it mean then for the main pillar of security in the region, the United States, that, you know, it ended this war talking about how it needs to destroy the capabilities of what it called a radical, sort of crazy regime, that kind of terminology. And now we have the nuclear armed superpower saying it's bombing, it might bomb again Kharg Island just for fun. What does that do to the image of a reliable, rational security partner?
That's a really good question. Because when a superpower, a major power, offers security guarantees, it's not just about the hardware and the capabilities, the airplanes, the airstrips, the aerial defense interceptors. It's also about the sense, the sort of strategic common sense that comes with it, that this is a responsible actor. And I think certainly within the way the US is presenting this war, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth appears to be taking enormous delight for destruction's sake in terms of the way the US is approaching this. And this is not enhancing of I think, the sense of stability for the sense of the US as a long-term partner, because I don't mean to put words into the mouths of Gulf states, and of course you're sitting in Doha, but the important thing is no matter how much of a rivalry there has been with Iran for some of the Arab states, there is also an intense desire for stability. And that, I think, is going to return to being the focus quite soon, is whenever the US has an exit ramp, what is the US going to do to ensure stability, given the fact that it's arguably radicalizing further an already radicalized Iranian theocratic regime, which has apocalyptic visions about its own destiny, its own sort of sense of martyrdom, many of which have been validated, because just one last point on this, let's not forget that the Iranians were engaged in negotiations. I heard from the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh last week in India. They were in Geneva in talks, and then the Americans launched this attack. So the Iranians, of course, are going to continue to want to destabilize.
Right. And since you obviously focus on war studies, what has this war so far told us about the state of Iranian preparedness, especially when it comes to their air defense systems and how much they've learned from June? It seems like the Israelis and the Americans have, to a great degree at least, something of a free hand.
Yeah, it's a really important point here. I think in terms of the Iranian military approach, Iran is known for running proxy groups throughout Iraq, throughout Lebanon, throughout Yemen. It's probably now starting to become a bit of a guerrilla actor in its own right, in the defense of its own territory, which is a very worrying prospect, meaning that a lot of its military capability has been debilitated, its air force, its navy being attacked relentlessly, but it will still have the ability to find sort of obscure parts of its own territory, launch those drones and missiles at ships, launch retaliatory strikes, and it's got a vast territory in which it can actually utilize to its advantage to continue to fire missiles and drones that may not cause substantial damage, but will continue to destabilize the region and remain a serious threat to Gulf states, to shipping, and to the US bases.
It's been good talking to you. Samir Puri, thank you so much from King's College London. Well, so far, no countries have actually publicly agreed to Donald Trump's call to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, but British officials have told US media the UK is discussing a range of options to ensure the security of shipping in the region. Also speaking to US media, Chinese embassy officials said Beijing is calling for hostilities to stop and that all parties have the responsibility to ensure stable and unimpeded energy supplies. Japanese officials, they've told local media in Japan that Tokyo will not dispatch ships just because Trump asks, saying Japan decides its own response and independent judgment is fundamental. Now, France, it says it is not sending ships, posting on X, no, the French aircraft carrier and its group are staying in the Eastern Mediterranean. Posture has not changed, defensive it is. Well, joining me now in the studio is Al Jazeera's Rasul Sarda. He's reported extensively from Iran, and Mohammed Al-Masri, Professor of Media Studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Good to have you both with us. So, any sign, Rasul, that countries are already sending warships?
I think indirectly, many countries are involved in this war, but directly...
How, when you say indirectly?
So, look, there are lots of military assets in the region, and there are the intelligence sharing, and also involving the technicalities of the war.
But this is different, right? You're talking about sending warships, Donald Trump sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most difficult places.
Involvement, so a publicly announced involvement. And if that happens, that's going to turn into a coalition indeed. So that's why I'm particularly saying that indirectly countries are involved, and no one wants to be directly dragged into this war. And there are a couple of the reasons for that. The first one, Iran, despite its conventional military capacity being significantly reduced, still it has the means of keeping a prolonged asymmetric warfare. And if any country is directly and publicly involved with that, they know that their assets, economic assets, military assets, and human assets could come under the Iranian attacks here. However, if Iran is further weakened, I see that possible, that there will be some countries joining the Americans and Israeli joint strikes against Iran. But from the American perspective, why Donald Trump will call all the countries to send in the Navy forces over there, it has logistic and geopolitical reasons. Logistically, definitely the United States need it because at the end of the day, they have to conduct all of this work from the remote military equipment. And geopolitically, they want to create a regional and international coalition led by the United States that we have seen during the campaign against Iraq, and that's going to bring the legitimacy to the operation.
Let me bring Mohammed in. How likely and how keen do you think countries will be to send warships into what effectively is seen as something of a kill zone, the Strait of Hormuz, in a war that United Nations figures from the Secretary General to United Nations experts have spoken about as an illegal war?
Well, I think the short answer is that it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely. I'm very skeptical that countries are going to step forward for some of the reasons you mentioned, and also something that I was mentioning earlier, and that is that this is a really difficult task. I think Donald Trump is, and Pete Hegseth, I think they're underestimating how difficult this task is. It's going to be very difficult to manage security through the Strait of Hormuz. These are slow-moving ships. They travel about 25 kilometers per hour. They're massive targets.
In a very narrow waterway,
In a very narrow waterway. And this is important, Iran can strike the ships in the strait from anywhere on Iranian territory because those Shahed drones have a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. So and the strait is very close to the Iranian mainland. So Iran can really wreak havoc on the strait if it wants to. It's a very dangerous proposition, and this is why insurance companies are not willing to insure the ships or their crews.
Okay, and in the meantime, Rasul, while the world waits to see what does or doesn't transpire in the Strait of Hormuz. Heavy strikes on Isfahan. Why is that being targeted in particular?
Look, Isfahan is an industrial capital almost of Iran. So it's the third largest city after Tehran and Mashhad, and traditionally is hosting lots of factories that are particularly involved in Iran's steel and iron industry. So we always talk about Iran's oil and gas resources, but it's also extremely rich when it comes to the steel industry as well. It's a great exporter in that sense, and perhaps that is the second largest income revenue of Iran that's coming. And now, particularly after attacking not attacking, but stopping the oil export from Iran, he's going after the other sectors as well. So here we're seeing a strategy that is militarily reduce Iran and then cut the economic lifeline of the establishment over that and force the country into a surrender.
But as we see, the US strikes target wider infrastructure, civilian factories, and so on. Are we seeing a widening as well of Iranian strikes on the Gulf, targeting with warnings to ports in the UAE, as well as other targets?
We are, and this is what scholars mean when they talk about the escalation ladder. We're quickly climbing that escalation ladder. There's a kind of tit for tat now. We saw Iran strike some of those energy sites last week. Relatively limited strikes, but then you had this major escalation yesterday by the United States with the strike on the Kharg
What do you
island.
make of the back and forth over some of these strikes that we've seen? Saudi Arabia report drone strikes going on, and then the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, say we have nothing to do with this. Is this diplomacy? Is this the impact of some of the same UN figures who've criticized Iranian strikes on the Gulf and its legality?
Right. I mean, there are a number of possibilities. One possibility is that Iran is carrying out these attacks and just denying because they want to maintain this kind of plausible deniability. Another possibility is that there are some number of false flag attacks that has been suggested as a possibility. Israel certainly would have an interest in carrying out some of these attacks. I think what Rasul said earlier is also very possible, and that is that there's an issue, a problem with the chain of command. It's very decentralized, and so you have units basically acting on their own without having gotten permission from the leadership in the IRGC.
All right, thank you so much, both of you, for coming in. Mohammed Al-Masri from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and our senior correspondent, Rasul Sardar. The effects of rising oil prices caused by the Middle East conflict are being felt across Asia. In Indonesia, officials are warning that funds for one of the government's signature social programs could be diverted just to maintain fuel subsidies. Barnaby Lowe reports from the capital, Jakarta.
It's Ramadan, but students at this school are still getting free food inside these bags: crackers, an egg, bread, and some dates for when they break their fast later. I'm in Jakarta, where every day schools here distribute free meals, usually for breakfast, but today and for the rest of the month, a snack. This free meals initiative is a signature program of President Prabowo Subianto's administration, but the conflict in the Middle East is threatening to derail it.
The meal usually includes milk, but not today. We can't demand, though. We just accept whatever the government provides.
But what does the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran have to do with government-subsidized meals here? Well, Iran's retaliatory attacks in the Gulf have forced the closure of oil and gas refineries, slowing energy supplies to countries like Indonesia, leading to higher fuel prices. And that means government-subsidized fuel takes precedence. More public funds are being used to cushion the impact on the millions of motorists. Prices at this fuel station still stable at just over $0.50 to around 70 cents a liter, despite a spike in the price of crude. But subsidies worth nearly $6 billion could be diverted from the free meal scheme, according to the finance minister. Adding to the pressure, millions of people are expected to travel across Indonesia next week for the Eid holiday. In the first few days of the conflict, the energy minister warned the country had enough oil reserves for about 3 weeks.
I'm very worried because if fuel becomes scarce or prices increase, transportation and food costs will rise too.
Government officials later said 3 weeks' supply was the usual fuel stockpile and that there was nothing to worry about. But the question now is how much state coffers can absorb before fuel prices increase, and as a result, prices of food in markets like this one. Barnaby Low, Al Jazeera, Jakarta.
Let's take a look at other stories making the global headlines now. An Israeli attack on Gaza has killed 3 Palestinians in the Nusayrat refugee camp. On Saturday, funerals were held for 5 people killed in separate Israeli strikes. Israel continues to attack the Strip despite a US-brokered truce reached in October. Gaza's health ministry says more than 600 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire began. Hani Mahmoud is live for us in Gaza City. So, Hani, take us through the latest attack which claimed lives.
Sammy, this is something that is not new and it's not unusual for Palestinians to wake up every morning to the sounds of explosion or reports of Palestinians killed. Earlier this morning, about 6 in the morning, a drone strike targeted a flat in a residential building in central Gaza. The attack left 3 people killed, a father, mother, and their children. An hour later, as they were transported to the hospital, a 4th person was identified as a child, 12-year-old child was killed, and he lives with his family in a neighboring flat next to the flat that was targeted by the drone strike. The victims were identified as Kamal Aish and his wife Halima and their child, and the 4th and the 2nd child from the neighboring flat. This is not the first time we see this happening. Almost nearly a daily basis, we see these attacks, mixture of the heavy artillery, the airstrikes, attacks either by the drones or the fighter jets across the Gaza Strip. Since the ceasefire was announced back on October 11th, to this day, we're looking at close to 658 Palestinians have been killed. Close to half of this number happen to be women and children from these various attacks across the Gaza Strip. And all of these attacks happen to take place outside the yellow line area that we're talking about, a deeper area in the western part of the Strip, the central area, Gaza City. And this particular area, As-Sawarha area in the southern western part of a Nusayrat refugee camp, over the past months, it turned into a displacement site from largely farmland surrounded by some of the buildings into now a sea of tens of displaced Palestinians who have either been pushed into displacement recently or since the beginning of the genocide, they could not go back to their homes here in the northern part of the Strip or the eastern part of the Gaza Strip. Close to 1,700 Palestinians have been injured over the past 6 months of ceasefire, or since the ceasefire was announced. It started to be a daily norm for Palestinians, impacting their livelihood in a negative way, eroding any sense of safety and security, and continues to make people feel that this ceasefire it hasn't been sustainable and it hasn't provided any protection whatsoever for them.
And in addition to that, people in Gaza having to deal with a sandstorm, right?
Absolutely. That was yesterday. A sandstorm, a powerful one, coupled with a strong wind, swept across the Gaza Strip, uprooting and blowing away tents, makeshift tents here. When we talk about tents, people here, we talk about the makeshift tents, the shelters, the temporary shelters that Palestinians have been living in for the past 2 years since the beginning of displacements, forced displacement across the Gaza Strip. The storm displacement sites and forcing people either to spend hours after that to secure these damaged shelters and try to go back or seek temporary shelters elsewhere. The storm filled these makeshift with sand and dust, just make living conditions extra difficult already for Palestinians, vulnerable groups, children, women, and those with medical complications suffered the most, as reported from the hospital. That particularly group with respiratory conditions suffered the most from the sandstorm. It was not until the afternoon hours of yesterday it eased down with a little bit of rain toward the end of the day that washed off the dust. But again, it just left many of the people here vulnerable, as many of these as many of these shelters, temporary shelters, the makeshift tents, cannot withstand the horrible living conditions and the harsh realities caused not just by the displacement and bombardment, but also by the weather conditions, worsening weather conditions, whether it's summertime, wintertime, or sandstorms like the one we just experienced.
That's Hani Mahmoud for us from Gaza City. Well, 4 members of a Palestinian family, including 2 children, have been killed after Israeli troops opened fire on their vehicle in the occupied West Bank. It happened early on Sunday in the city of Tubas. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 2 other children from the same family, aged 8 and 11, were hit in the head by shrapnel. The ministry says more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in attacks in the occupied West Bank since October 2023. And Ukrainian authorities say Russian missile and drone strikes have killed 4 people in Brovary near Kiev. At least 10 others were injured in the attack. Ukraine says Russian forces also targeted the northeastern city of Sumy. Kiev added it has struck an oil refinery in southern Russia's Krasnodar region. Anti-government protesters in central Cuba have attacked an office of the ruling Communist Party. Videos on social media appeared to show a large fire in front of the building. People were seen throwing rocks and chanting "Liberty." The rare show of dissent comes as the country suffers frequent power blackouts and food shortages. They've been made worse by a US blockade on imports of Venezuelan oil. Last year, at least 80 fishermen went missing in Ecuador's Manabí province. Many are believed to be the victims of so-called pirates. The country has seen an unprecedented security crisis involving criminal gangs off its coast. Our Latin America editor, Lucia Nguyen, reports from the city of Manta. And we should warn viewers, her report contains distressing images.
An air of excitement when fishermen returned to shore to unload their catch in Manta, on Ecuador's Pacific coast. Swordfish, albacora, mahi-mahi. This has been a good day. But spending days and even weeks at sea to guarantee a good catch is no longer the challenge.
High-ranking anti-narcotics police tell us that this ocean has become dangerous, and they're not referring to the current or to rough seas. This, they say, is a kind of lawless world out here where there's no one to protect small fishing vessels from extortionists, from drug traffickers, and especially from modern-day pirates who think nothing of stranding the crew out here in the middle of the ocean after they've stolen their catch, and especially what they really came for, their motors, which for most fishermen are worth a fortune.
This crew of 3 are 3rd and even 4th generation fishermen, and tell me they don't dare go out as far as they used to.
You know when you go out, but never if and when you will come back, especially now with the pirates. You don't know if you will return.
Is it worth it?
I don't think so anymore, but it's the only work that the majority of us know.
The pirates, they say, have no pity.
The pirates grab the fishermen and they put them in there. They lock them all in here. With a lock, they can't get out, and they end up suffocating to death.
Outside this house hang the shoes of 25-year-old Jefferson Mero. His mother Maria says he and his brother-in-law haven't been heard from since January 20th.
There were 4 boats, but only one returned, with 2 men. They say they couldn't find the rest, but that they saw smoke in the horizon, like a ship was burning. I am very worried about my son. He was the one who supported me, my youngest child.
The province of Manabí is now Ecuador's most deadly, fueled by cocaine trafficking and feuding criminal gangs. Some of them former fishermen who've turned to drug running.
The important thing is to realize that we've reached a point where this can't continue, where the state has to react and act to detain this problem.
Efforts so far have fallen far short. As we leave, a new massacre at a nearby beach. 2 fishermen and 2 standers-by killed. An apparent act of reprisal by a rival gang. A scene that horrifies, but no longer surprises anyone. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Manta, Ecuador.
Now, the American flag has been raised in the Venezuelan capital for the first time since 2019. Countries are restoring diplomatic relations following the dramatic capture of President Nicolas Maduro by U.S. Special Forces in January. Washington cut ties with Caracas during President Donald Trump's first term in office, accusing Maduro of election fraud. The acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, has welcomed the restoration of ties. Vietnam is holding a vote for its new National Assembly. 79 million people will elect the 500 representatives in the Assembly, but all of them have been vetted and approved by the ruling Communist Party. The National Assembly approves government appointments. It's expected to implement policy outlined by the Communist Party. Formula One will not be heading to the Middle East next month after races in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain were cancelled because of the war in Iran. Security concerns led to the decision as both Gulf countries have been under Iranian drone and missile attacks. The F1 governing body has decided not to replace the races, reducing the calendar to 22 events this year. The airspace closures in the Middle East have also caused disruption for Europe-based Formula One teams and staff travelling to Melbourne. That brings us to a short break now. You can find much more on our website, aljazeera.com.
As the war on Iran escalates, Al Jazeera's correspondents are on the ground.
This is the first time that President Trump has spoken publicly live.
We projected 4 to 5 weeks.
All the while insisting that the United States has plenty of weapons left.
We have only just begun.
Still, he's not ruling out sending U.S. troops into Iran.
We expect to take additional losses.
Today we grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action.
That is a price Americans say they do not want repeated.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
Examining the impact of today's headlines, setting the agenda for tomorrow's discussions. International filmmakers and world-class journalists bring programs to inform and inspire you on Al Jazeera.
On Counting the Cost, from Europe to Asia, countries are searching for alternatives to Middle Eastern oil and gas. What options do they really have? Is Russia the biggest winner? Who stands to gain and who will pay the price if the war drags on? Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera.
It's 0800 GMT, and you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the war between the US, Israel, and Iran. I'm Sami Zaidan. US and Israeli forces bombed the city of Isfahan in the early hours of Sunday. The death toll inside Iran now approaching 1,500. Iran retaliates against Israel, launching a wave of attacks overnight on Tel Aviv. At least 3 people are injured. Israeli airstrikes continue to hit Beirut and southern Lebanon. At least 4 people killed in Sidon. And in the US, The president says other countries will help his military secure the Strait of Hormuz, but none are promising to do so. The death toll is rising in the conflict between Israel, the US, and Iran. More than 1,400 people have been killed, millions of people displaced, and the world's energy supplies disrupted. The central Iranian city of Isfahan has been hit by a wave of US and Israeli attacks on Sunday morning. One strike hit a factory, killing at least 15 workers. The Iranian capital has also been bombed. And as global shipping gets disrupted in the Strait of Hormuz, the US President Donald Trump is now calling on allies to send warships to protect the area. He says many countries are sending help, but hasn't said which ones. About a fifth of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes through the strait. We're live in the occupied West Bank in Doha. At first, we head over to Tehran and speak to Tawhid Asadi. So we've seen, Tawhid, overnight intensive US and Israeli strikes targeting wide range of civilian targets and also focused on Isfahan. Why?
Well, actually, this is the continuation of the airstrikes by the Americans and Israelis targeting different places. And now we're talking about an intensified wave of strikes targeting Isfahan, one of the historical cities, a third most populated city in the country, as well as a city that hosts a lot of factories when it comes to industrial complexes, when it comes to military industries which are located in that city. But we have to keep in mind that it is not only Isfahan, but also in different cities across the country, including here in the capital, where we received reports of massive explosions being heard in the eastern parts of the capital very recently. We know that this is the ongoing airstrikes happening, and in more than 200 cities up until the moment we have received reports of the continuation of the airstrikes targeting not just the military headquarters or the buildings belonging to the state, but also the residential areas. And on that, we've got the Red Crescent coming out with the latest statistics regarding the civilian and infrastructural casualties. They are saying that more than 42,000 civilian structures have been damaged, partially or fully demolished, which includes over 36,000 residential units, house and apartments, more than 6,000 commercial establishments, including factories and shops, and of course 160 healthcare facilities such as hospitals, and 120 educational facilities such as schools, and interestingly, even 17 buildings belonging to the Red Crescent itself. But we know that infrastructural damages do not stop there. The other day, we witnessed the attack on the oil facilities across the Iranian capital. Oil depots were targeted, creating a serious environmental damage, not just in terms of the strikes, but also the let's say water, oil, and soil contamination, something that experts are warning about.
And at the same time, Tawhid, we're hearing from Donald Trump talk about other countries will be sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz. How are Iranians reacting to that prospect?
Well, it is being interpreted here as maybe part of the weakness of the American administration to complete this war on their own, and now they're trying to actually resort to other players to further complicate the situation. And in terms of the geostrategic situation, we have to keep in mind that first, Iran has said that it has already closed the Strait of Hormuz, not to everyone, but to their ships and vessels belonging to their adversaries. And also they're coming out with very strong messages of warning about the oil facilities being targeted. And then they said on that regard, following the attack that happened in Khark, the geostrategically significant point when it comes to the oil exports of the country. They came out to say that if the oil infrastructures of the country becomes under attack, the response is going to be a tit-for-tat strategy. A military official in Tehran warned that in case of such an attack, all the oil infrastructures which are in a sense related or have any cooperation with the Americans are going to be their legitimate targets, and that is running the risk of another level of escalation in this already delicate situation, seeing the leverage that Iran tries to place when it comes to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, seeing the attacks that Iran is conducting. And on that, we heard this very recent statement from IRGC about another wave of their retaliatory strikes, which not only just targets the Israeli territories, but also the American bases across the region. At this point, all in all, I can say the situation looks to be far from any point of de-escalation.
All right, Tawheed Asadi there from Tehran. Well, Iran launched a new wave of retaliatory attacks on Israel overnight, striking a number of central communities. This was the scene in Tel Aviv district early on Sunday. Police say a missile strike injured at least 3 people and damaged several vehicles and buildings. Rescue teams were searching the area to ensure no one was trapped in the debris. Nida Ibrahim joins us live now from Tamun in the occupied West Bank. So, Nida, despite all the talk of Iran's capabilities being destroyed, are we seeing new waves of missile attacks and sometimes different types of munitions being used?
Yes, Sami, since midnight at least, the Israeli authorities have detected 6 different barrages of missiles coming into Israel from Iran. The type of these missiles, as you say there, Sami, it's what's causing tension and worry, because we're talking about cluster munitions, fragmenting warheads. Sometimes they splinter and explode upon interception. Other times they do so upon when they get here. So this type of missile, this type of munition that the Israelis have is causing a lot of tension in Israel. What is also causing tension is the fact that some of these missiles are happening simultaneously with Hezbollah rockets that are still being fired. And just in the past 20 minutes, we've heard that 10 rockets made their way from Lebanon into Haifa. I find it difficult not to reference where we are right now and tell you what's happening. We are in Tamun, a Palestinian village in the north of the occupied West Bank, where the Israeli forces have been here late last night, and they killed a family of 4, a father, a mother, and 2 children, and the 2 other children who were in the car have also been killed. So we have a total of 4 killed and 2 other children who have been injured as a result of this shooting. This is the reality that Palestinians are having to go through day in and day out, as they are also being trapped under this rocket fire that sometimes shrapnels of which falls here in the occupied West Bank. But back to the main story of these Iranian-launched rockets and Hezbollah-launched missiles that are making their way into Israel. Yes, they are decreasing in quantity, but these cluster munitions that are sometimes fired and fall in areas with a few kilometers diameter from the initial place where they are exploding, this is causing a lot of worry and tension in Israel.
And that's Nida Ibrahim for us from the heart of the occupied West Bank. Thank you so much. Israeli airstrikes have hit a residential building in southern Lebanon. 4 people were killed and 2 others injured in the attack on Sidon. It comes a day after 30 people were killed in Israeli strikes on the city. More than 700 people have been killed across Lebanon since hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel resumed this month. And some Lebanese leaders have suggested they take part in rare negotiations with Israel. But Zaina Khudr in Beirut explains why talks are unlikely to be successful.
Lebanon's Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri, one of the most powerful politicians in the country, who, like Hezbollah, represents the Shia community, and this is a deeply divided society, so it is very important that there is consensus among the different communities. He has drawn a line in the sand when he says that there will be no negotiations under fire. What he is saying is that for any negotiations to happen, Israel needs to stop its attacks, and the people, the displaced people, need to be able to return to their homes. A source close to Hezbollah has also said that they have not received any serious initiative for negotiations. Lebanon's top leadership is in a very difficult position. It doesn't really have much leverage. It has offered direct talks with Israel, something which is really very divisive in Lebanon. Israel wants Hezbollah to be disarmed. Hezbollah is refusing to do that. Hezbollah has told the Lebanese state, we will not disarm as long as Israel continues to occupy territory in southern Lebanon. So according to that last ceasefire agreement in 2024, Hezbollah was supposed to have disarmed and Israel was supposed to have withdrawn from territory along the border. So there's talk about diplomatic initiatives, but it appears that the battleground is still taking shape. No side really in the position to impose conditions. Yes, the Israeli military controls the skies. It can target across the country. It can level buildings. It has killed nearly 1,000 people. It has displaced nearly 1 million people. But Hezbollah believes that it continues to repel advancing troops in southern Lebanon, preventing the Israeli military, so far at least, from taking control of more territory in southern Lebanon. So neither side really in the position to impose their conditions. So as long as that continues, this, the battlefield not taking shape, it's going to be very difficult to see these negotiations lead anywhere.
And Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE and Qatar also reported interceptions and attacks overnight. Dmitry Medvedenko is live for us here in Doha. So how does Sunday morning look in the Gulf now?
Well, let's start with Saudi Arabia there, Sammy, because there was a report there that they intercepted 4 drones in the Riyadh Governorate, not in the east of the country, where we have been reporting the past couple of days. They've been downing drones headed to the Shaiba oil field, but in Riyadh. And right before that, a similar report of 10 drones downed near Riyadh and in the east. A report that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, has specifically denied, saying they have nothing to do with that attack and encouraging Riyadh to investigate the true origins of this attack. Now, the United States Embassy in Riyadh also issuing a message to US citizens saying that they should make up their minds on whether to stay or leave based on their own concerns for their safety, and encouraging people to take commercial flights. Meanwhile, in Oman, the US has actually told all of its non-essential personnel and their families to leave the country after a series of attacks there in the past couple of days led to the first 2 fatalities for Oman in this 16 days of conflict. Now, Kuwait airport also came under attack. Its radar got damaged. That's in Kuwait City. And an additional attack was on Ahmed Al Jaber Air Base, where the Ministry of Defense in Kuwait said 3 servicemen sustained minor injuries there. And in the UAE, we've also seen messages that alerts were sent to people about attacks, including in very much central Dubai, in Dubai Marina. Iran also saying that it's targeting the Al Dhafra military base near Abu Dhabi.
All right, thanks so much to Dmitry Medvedenko there in Doha. Well, so far, no countries have publicly agreed to Donald Trump's call to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz. But British officials tell US media the UK is discussing a range of options to ensure the security of shipping in the region. Also speaking to US media, Chinese embassy officials said Beijing is calling for hostilities to stop and that all parties have the responsibility to ensure stable and unimpeded energy supplies. Japanese officials told local media Japan won't dispatch ships just because Trump asked, saying Japan decides its own response and independent judgment is fundamental. Well, France has said it is not sending ships, posting on X. No, the French aircraft carrier and its group are staying in the eastern Mediterranean. Posture has not changed. Defensive it is. Well, joining me in the studio is Al Jazeera's Rasul Sardar. He's reported extensively from Iran, and Mohammed Al-Masri, a professor in media studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. So, first of all, Professor Mohammed, are we likely to see countries want to join this war, which the UN Secretary General and UN experts have characterized as an illegal war, and in an area that many strategists consider to be something of a kill zone, the Strait of Hormuz?
Right. I think it's very unlikely. The war has been pretty catastrophic to this point. There are a lot of losers across the board. In terms of the Strait of Hormuz, as I mentioned earlier, it's very close to the Iranian mainland. These Shahed drones can strike the strait from anywhere inside of Iranian territory because they can reach up to 2,500 kilometers. The ships are very large. They move very slowly through a very narrow strait, and so they're easy targets. Iran can also use speedboats. People have talked about the possibility of mines.
So if all that has discouraged the Americans from deploying their naval assets right into the Strait of Hormuz, any reason to believe it'll be an easier job for anybody else's warships?
No, I don't think so. I think that the Iranians can wreak havoc in the strait if they want to, and I think everybody understands that.
Okay, Rasul, we've also seen at the same time heavy U.S. bombing, and Israeli bombing, focused somewhat on Isfahan. Why? Explain to viewers what is the importance of that.
Isfahan traditionally has been particularly the industrial capital of Iran when it comes to the iron and the steel factories over there. So Iran is largely known by its tremendous resources of the oil and gas, but it has almost all the other available resources as well. So that's why particularly Isfahan is important for that.
They're trying to take out its industrial capacity as a whole?
Indeed. So the first 2 weeks we have seen that Americans were more and more focusing on reducing Iran's capacity militarily, but now they're going after the establishment's economic lifeline. So cutting the oil from Khark to be exported to the world, and now they're going after the other industries. And I think that is having a strategy over there. So it is putting up the pressure militarily and economically and trying to force Iran into a surrender.
You used the word strategy there. Mohammed, as you read it, what is the U.S. strategy? Is it shifting towards now more of a focus on economic state collapse, since the military side perhaps didn't go the way that the U.S. and Israel hoped?
Yeah, I think it's clear now, if it wasn't already clear from the start, that Donald Trump kind of had his arm twisted a little bit to get into this war by Benjamin Netanyahu and the pro-Israel cohort in Washington and in Israel. And I think he was told that this was going to be a quick and successful regime change operation, that people would rise up. And that obviously didn't happen. I think he can probably see the writing on the wall now that it's not going to happen. And so from the U.S. perspective, and I think also from the Israeli perspective, the next best thing is to set Iran back many years, perhaps even decades.
But Rasul, as we see the U.S., each time they take a step up the escalation ladder, we see Iran do the same thing. So will this mean wider Iranian attacks across the Gulf, something that's also been criticized by UN experts in terms of how it sits with international law? But nevertheless, is that likely to continue and step up as the U.S. targets Iran's civilian infrastructure?
That is a possibility, but for now, so Iranians are quite clear. So it's a tit-for-tat policy, and if you attack our military, we are going to attack your military. If you attack our civilian infrastructure, we are going to target your civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and in return, energy infrastructure. That is, I think, tit-for-tat. However, here, one thing must be seen, that when it comes to Iran's conventional capacity militarily, it is day by day being reduced, and that is a fact. But Iran still has tremendous means of asymmetric warfare, and I think that is where Iranians can keep it going for weeks and even if it's necessary for months. And Iranians are betting on the time. So they believe that the Americans got the clock, but the Iranians have got the time. And if it gets prolonged, it's going to create more cost for Washington domestically, politically, and also in terms of the region as well. So
and the
Iranians believe that threshold for the pain or the fragility of the region and Americans and Israelis is definitely much higher than the Iranians one. So Iranians can absorb the pressure for a longer period of time.
Well, Professor, are we seeing, I'm trying to make sense of a statement that came out of Donald Trump talking about he might bomb just for fun. What does this say? Is it a lack of, are they running out of patience because, as he said earlier, he's run out of targets? Is it a lack of strategy? You know, how does it reflect on the image of the US as the sort of reliable security partner for this part of the world or for any part of the world, frankly, when you have a nuclear-armed nation talking about bombing for fun?
Well, first of all, it's a stunningly irresponsible statement for a U.S. president to make. That's number one. Number two, I think it does underscore the fact that Trump is kind of making things up as he goes along. He's trying to project confidence and success and power amid what is really seen by many analysts, including analysts in the United States, as a catastrophic war. He clearly didn't think this through. This was not calculated as carefully as it could have been. I think that's putting it mildly. I think Trump realizes now that this is going to cost America a lot of money. It's already hurting the American economy. And maybe more importantly for Trump and for his own personal ambitions, it's likely to cost Republicans the midterm elections and also any chance that Trump had at a third term. He's been, of course, lobbying for a third term. So this has been disastrous on all counts, and I think that statement underscores some of the desperation in addition to just the overall lack of sort of professionalism and responsibility.
And Rasul, no doubt this is going to have implications beyond this part of the world, right? There's question marks about the positions of other countries, particularly China and Russia, and to what extent they may become involved in this.
Indeed, so far it's quite difficult to really track the position of Russians and Chinese, despite the diplomatic support for Iran in the United Nations Security Council being absent in the recent voting. But when I was in Iran, I was talking to an Iranian official and asking if Russians and Chinese are practically helping Iran or supporting Iran, because that was a question mark. So during the 12 days war, we haven't seen any significant contribution of China and Russia, and now whether Iranians think that's going to be different if a war comes. So they said that practically no. No air defense system, no military equipment, only with the exception of the fuel for the missiles. So as of now, that's why it's extremely difficult to see if really Russians and Chinese are going to risk their relations with the United States in favor of Iran.
And we're seeing, as we broaden the discussion out, Professor Al-Masri, we're seeing statements from countries as far away as North Korea talk about the illegality of what the US and Israel have done, accompanied by, of course, new rocket tests. Is there a sense that this can have a ripple effect across other hotspots right around the world?
I think there's no question that this war is going to make the world less safe in the long term. One of the things that I said, and other analysts have noted, is that it's almost certain when this ends that Iran is going to very quickly pursue a nuclear weapon, understanding that that is probably the greatest deterrence against future attack. So I think that Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to try to sell this as a war that would make the region more safe. Obviously, we're seeing that that's not the case. Donald Trump tried to sell it as a war that would make the world more safe. But unfortunately, I think when the dust settles, we're all going to be less safe as a result of this
That's
war.
an interesting point. Rasul, you've covered Iran extensively. We've had the elimination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Where does his fatwa against developing nuclear weapons stand? Does it end with his passing?
Definitely. So it is. He was the supreme leader, and he is also a religious authority. Any other religious authority, according to Shia political theology and according to the Islamic law of the Shias, which is called, that's why it's called the Walid Faqih. So Faqih is Islamic jurisprudence. So this is the law. And any other supreme leader, not only even supreme leader, any other religious authority, also with the proper credentials, can actually reverse that fatwa.
But we haven't heard anything from Mujtaba about
indeed,
that, right?
And indeed, when still Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, was alive, many of the high-level Iranian officials were again telling him, well, you have released this decree in 2003, but now if the country, at least can you make the amendments into that, if the country is under an existential threat, that the country can go with that path. So it's possible, and particularly now that the IRGC is much more in control and having a greater influence over the new supreme leader, that's very well possible.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming in. Rasul Sardar, senior correspondent, and of course Mohammed Al Masri from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank you so much, Professor. You're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder now of our top stories this hour. Iran's central province of Isfahan has been hit by a wave of US and Israeli attacks. One strike hit a factory, killing at least 15 workers. The Iranian capital also has been bombed. Iran launched another wave of missile strikes on Tel Aviv. Most were intercepted, but falling shrapnel injured at least 3 people. There were also reports of damage in several communities in central Israel. US President Donald Trump has called on allies to send warships to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. He says many countries are sending help. Iran has been disrupting traffic in this vital trade route for global energy supplies. Armed groups in Iraq that are linked to Iran have released video they say shows the recent attacks on US targets. The pictures from the Iraqi Hezbollah brigades come from cameras mounted on drones. They appear to show low-altitude strikes on the US Victoria military base near Baghdad airport on Saturday. Well, after the attack, the US Embassy in Baghdad called for all American citizens to immediately leave Iraq, saying there is a significant threat of attack. And there are reports of multiple homes being damaged by a drone strike in Erbil. Residents say the civilian area was hit just after midnight, and there are no airports or military bases nearby. As we've been reporting, the US President, Donald Trump, claims many countries will send warships to protect the Strait of Hormuz. About 20% of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes through the strait. Iran has effectively blocked it. But according to the Iranian ambassador to India, some Indian ships were allowed to pass through the strait on Saturday. Trump has signaled he's not ready to end the conflict with Iran at this stage. In a wide-ranging interview with NBC News, he said he is not prepared to strike a deal with Tehran, saying the current terms are not good enough yet, adding that any terms will have to be, quote, very solid. Trump claimed US strikes on Kharg Island totally demolished most of the island, and that the US, quote, may hit it a few more times just for fun. Al Jazeera's John Ullman is following developments in Washington and sent this report.
President Trump's been railing against media coverage of his campaign against Iran, describing it as fake news. He says that he and the United States has destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability. But at the same time, he's tacitly recognizing that he has a problem with the Strait of Hormuz. He says that even with the destruction that the United States has wrought, that Iran still has the capacity to attack that with drones or with missiles. And he's actually asked for the help of other countries to try and protect oil tankers and vessels that are going through that all-important strait. 20% of the world's oil traffic that goes through there. He's said he wants help from China, the United Kingdom, France, South Korea. He's named some of the countries. And in a later interview with NBC News, he said that countries had actually committed to the idea. And not just that, but they said that it was a great idea. But he hasn't named actually which countries are willing to do that. And the United States itself has said that at the moment it can't militarily escort vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, that it's working towards that at some date. President Trump also said in the NBC interview that he got the offer of a deal that Iran have reached out with him to make a deal, but the terms of that deal weren't good enough yet. So for now, that he and the United States were going to continue fighting. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Washington, D.C.
A new poll in the US suggests many Americans are worried about the military strikes on Iran. The survey by Quinnipiac University finds 53% of voters oppose the attacks, while 40% support them. Nearly three-quarters say they don't want US ground troops sent to Iran. More than three-quarters believe the conflict could lead to an attack inside the United States, and many also fear higher oil prices. And the poll suggests mixed views about Israel. 44% saying the United States is too supportive of Israel, while the same number says the level of support is about right. Well, earlier, my colleague Sarah Khairat spoke to Rina Shah, geopolitical advisor and the founding principal of Vental Strategic Advisory Group. She's also a former senior Republican congressional advisor. And she says there are disagreements about the war even within the White House.
What we're seeing right now isn't just policy disagreement. It's a genuine tug of war inside Trump's inner circle over this war in Iran. On one side, you've got the hawks who want to finish what they started, which is, put on regime pressure, have full dominance in the Gulf. On the other side, you've got voices that are closer to the original America First instinct. Folks like Vice President J.D. Vance, who are signaling daylight here. They're saying this could drag on and it could cost us politically and hand the midterms to the other side. So it's not chaos, it's just classic Republican tension between decisive action and avoiding quagmires.
And you just mentioned Trump's America First, and that's what got Donald Trump elected in the first place. But we're seeing, though, the complete opposite, it seems, here for many. Do you think the Republican Party risks losing voters moving forward if this war is prolonged? And could it hurt Republicans in November's midterm election, for example?
Oh, without a doubt. Republican voters sent a strong message to Washington that they no longer wanted nation building abroad. And so what you're seeing within the Republican Party right now are sort of three different camps. The first is neoconservatives, folks like Senator Lindsey Graham. And then you've got in the second camp, folks like Vice President J.D. Vance, who, again, is showing his distance and how divergent he is in his views on this from his very own president, his own boss. And then thirdly, you've got, again, people who really consider themselves at some point allies with President Trump. And they really oscillate somewhere between Make America Great Again and America First. But they are unique in that they are people like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens. These people are also known to embrace conspiracy theories. They are the third camp. So I'll just say this, the fracture really boils down to one question. Is this a quick surgical operation to neuter Iran's nuclear ambitions and proxies, or are we sleepwalking into another long, expensive entanglement?
You actually hit the nail on the head there, because I was going to ask you, for Republicans that are at this moment supporting it, is that support guaranteed over the long term if the war does continue because Trump remains committed to it, for example?
I'll put it this way. Trump sold no forever wars as a slogan, but also as a promise. But Iran is not folding like some expected here. And namely the president. He thought Iran would just fold immediately after we took out Khamenei and thought that the people would take to the streets and as he put it in that first couple of days, that it's up to the Iranian people to determine in their future and to form their own government almost. That naivety, I think we see now how really it's hurt the president, because again, the polls are reflecting this. But the resilience of this Iranian regime hitting back at American bases, again, threatening Hormuz, it has forced a real rethink here in Washington. Insiders within the Republican Party are split because the easy victory narrative from February is colliding with this March reality we have now. Higher oil prices, allied jitters, and a base that is asking, wait, this is what America First looks like?
The head of the U.S. broadcast regulator is warning media against airing what he calls hoaxes and news distortions. That's after President Donald Trump lashed out at American outlets for reporting that Iran had damaged 5 U.S. refueling planes in Saudi Arabia. In social media posts quoting Trump's message, FCC Chair Brendan Carr wrote, "The broadcasters have a chance to correct course," and threatened they would lose their licenses if they didn't. And some Democrats are pushing back following that announcement by the FCC chair. California Governor Gavin Newsom posted on X saying, "If Trump doesn't like your coverage of the war, his FCC will pull your broadcast license. That is flagrantly unconstitutional." And Senate Democrat Brian Schatz said it's a clear directive to provide positive war coverage. He added, "This is worse than the comedian stuff. The stakes are much higher." He's talking about how a war is covered. And Frank Smythe is the founder of Global Journalist Security. He says the Trump administration's attempt to control media coverage is ominous.
This is unprecedented. No official in the United States in the position of being the Federal Communication Chairman has threatened or has exercised the revoking of a license of a news organization for not covering a war, an overseas military campaign, the way the administration wants. That is not the behavior of a democratic nation. That is the behavior of a dictatorship. And so far, it's just a threat. The courts would ultimately have to weigh in if the chairman of the FCC were to revoke these licenses. But this is an attempt to restrict the press that goes beyond anything we've seen to date from this administration or from any other administration in the United States. And I think it's going to get worse because the administration seems to be panicking. They have hit military, economic, and civilian targets in Iran, trying to force the regime to cry uncle and to bend to the will of the United States. But that is not how wars work, and many analysts predicted this. Now things are not going well. There are economic consequences, like the flow of oil is being restricted and prices are going up. So the administration seems desperate to control the media, so it's now violating what would be a violation of the Constitution if they were to exercise and revoke licenses for not covering the war the way they want.
Well, since the US and Israel launched their war in Iran, Yemen's Iran-backed Ansarullah Houthis have noticeably been absent. Inside the country, there are mixed views on whether the group should join Tehran's retaliation. Some are encouraging strikes, but others worry it could lead to another humanitarian disaster. Yusuf Mauri reports from Sana'a.
In recent years, Yemen's Ansarullah group, also known as the Houthis, has been targeting what it says are U.S. and Israeli-linked ships in the Red Sea, saying it's in solidarity with the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza. But since the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran began last month, the Yemeni group has largely refrained from getting involved. Some hardliners are reportedly advocating for renewed strikes against U.S. and Israeli-linked assets. They argue that Yemen's military capabilities have only grown and that confrontation is inevitable. Yemen's geographic location gives it an advantage. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, is critical for global commerce.
Yemen can retaliate in a number of ways. It has strategic leverage over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. There's also hypersonic and ballistic missiles that can be used to target Tel Aviv or U.S. military and economic assets across the region.
But within Yemen itself, another conversation is taking shape after nearly a decade of foreign wars that have devastated the economy, roads, and buildings. Some Yemenis now express a desire to focus on improving their country.
The Yemeni people want peace and stability so that our nation and our economy can revive. There is no way for us to revive and improve our internal affairs while undergoing constant wars. However, we are ready for any scenario.
According to Ahmed al-Shirahi, a member of Ansar Allah Houthi movement, the conflict is viewed through a wider lens.
Whether we enter the war with Iran in this round or not, our long-term goal is to free the Middle East from all the U.S. military bases and their aircraft carriers. This is what we're aiming to achieve in the near future.
The debate within Yemen reflects a fundamental question facing the nation's leadership, whether to leverage its military capacity in regional confrontations or to channel its resources towards development and other domestic priorities.